As a massive JRPG fan, I have been looking for a long time to find an equal to two of my favorite games of all time back from the PlayStation 2 era, that being Final Fantasy X and Persona 4. And it's been a long journey. An entire generation yielded zero responses, and as we come to a near close, in the current generation of PS4 and Xbox One, I finally found one that not only can I say is an equal to these two, but may actually better. I'm CS Radical, welcome to Radical Reviews, and we're going to be talking about Trails of Cold Steel 3. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me on this edition of Radical Reviews, the first edition for that matter, as we try a different format for game reviews. Like I said before, I'm Adam, aka CS Radical, and we are talking about Trails of Cold Steel 3, a game developed by Neon Falcom that is currently out for the PlayStation 4 and Microsoft Windows. Will be on Nintendo Switch as of June 30th, 2020, at least at this point being the tentative date for it. So, this is a different format. Normally, when I try to do reviews, I try to do something a little more video-centric, although this is going to be more of a podcast than anything else. This is going to be featured on the VCR podcast channel that you can check out either on anchor.fm/VCR podcast, or you can look at through various outlets, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. On YouTube here, it's a very similar thing. I'm trying to make it at least as video positive as I can, so it's not just a still screen. But yeah, at the end of the day, I was trying to figure out how to actually review this game, and quite frankly, a few other games. I got a couple others I need to do. I finished Trails of Cold Steel. As of today, it's the 17th of May, and I finished this, I think, in March. So I've definitely got some time under my belt to put a review up for this game, and I've been really wanting to because this is a really fantastic game. But it was a very difficult process for me to figure out how, because I didn't record any of the gameplay, so it's not like I could be like, I can't do it like, say, an Angry Joe does. I can't do it, a lot of people on YouTube even do, where they have all this footage that they can throw at the screen and then they just talk over it. So I was trying to figure out something I could do that would at least satisfy me, because I don't just want to have a still image and then just talk. So I finally came up with this little format. So there's obviously pictures that are going to be rotating here. There will be a video background at some point if you're watching this on video. Otherwise, this is just a podcast in itself. So if you're listening to this through audio, obviously you're not going to get any of that special stuff. But on youtube.com/csradical, you can get a slightly different experience, at least for a visual aspect. So this has been an interesting journey, like I said at the top of the show here. I've been looking for a long time for a JRPG that I could really sink my teeth into and call one of the better games I've ever played, because my wheelhouse has always been JRPGs. If I have to make a list of top 10 video games of all time, the vast majority of them are going to be JRPGs, because it just ends up being the genre of games that I end up identifying the best with. It's a game that you can get your money's worth in time, but you also get in terms of story, in terms of characters, and all these things that sometimes a game that is 6 to 10 hours long just cannot produce. Now, granted, there is a lot of filler in a lot of JRPGs, but I'm the kind of guy that's okay with that. And especially these days now when podcasting is a thing too. So if there's points where I got to grind some stuff out, well, I just put something on in the background, and there I'm just concentrating even more. And I'm getting some other stuff done at the same time. It's a great multitask genre as well. So Trails of Cold Steel 3 is obviously a third game in a franchise. It's part of an entire whole of the Legend of Heroes series. They're actually, ironically enough, in this specific... Right now, I think this entire arc of Trails of Cold Steel is a 4-game series. There's one more after this that we're expecting, although you never know, because Japan loves to mess around with games and see there's never a finite number for these things. But this entire series encompasses two other arcs, two other sets of games. There is the Trails of Sky games, which have been very popular and well received on Steam. And then there's also there isn't really a title for it because it's just two separate games, but it's collectively known as the Crossbell arc, which is Trails, I think it's Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure. So in total, before even the first Trails of Cold Steel game begins, there are 5 games of story that are brought with it. And it brings an important question that I'm going to address right now. I was going to do it later, but since I started talking to like it this, I might as well do it now. Some people consider that you have to play Trails in the Sky, all 3 games, Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure, to be able to enjoy Trails of Cold Steel. And I can tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, as somebody who never played any of those 5 games, and especially Zero and Azure because they're technically not released in North America, it's actually manageable to do. I mean, there came a point in this specific game, in Trails of Cold Steel 3, where I finally had to at least look up videos that just quickly summarized what happened in these games that I've missed. But for the most part, I felt like whatever story that was being told in Trails of Cold Steel was very well told, and I didn't feel like I was falling behind. It just because in Trails of Cold Steel 3 specifically, in this game that I am reviewing, that they start to introduce characters from past series, there's some people that you're like, oh, you're a person, I don't know anything about you, so I finally just went and did that to at least get a sense of who I was dealing with. But in terms of actually playing these sets of games without knowing any of the story of these 5, you can get away with it. You can definitely get away with it, because for the first 2 games of that series, I had no idea that this was connected. I literally did not. And if people are saying, how did you not know? Well, I didn't know. It's as simple as that. So what is Trails of Cold Steel, or at least Trails of Cold Steel 3? Well, like I said, it's the 3rd of a series of now, at this point, 3 games. The 4th is coming out this fall here in North America. It is already released in Japan, because Japan always gets the fun stuff before us. The series is a JRPG series that takes place in what I can only describe as like a mixture of fantasy, modern reality, and a little bit of steampunk at the same time. So the first game basically puts you in the hands of, I guess you could say it's a high school student in a sense, like age-wise. Literally, you're going into a military boarding school, and it's pretty much like any standard like school, I guess, like show in an anime where it's a guy that's just trying to get his bearings and learn to harness the power that he was given from a young age. And it goes. You would think it follows that similar storyline, and what I really have loved about this series is that it kind of bucks that trend and does something that I've never seen a game, let alone a JRPG, actually pull off, and that's have a political struggle actually really do well in storytelling. Because a lot of the times when people use it, it's not very well done, because it doesn't feel legitimate. What happens in these games, and especially in the 3rd game as we've now gotten really deep, is that they've made politics look exactly for what they are, as being a lot of playing to the public, a lot of lies, a lot of backstabbing, and quite frankly a lot of evil, because a lot of the political game is completely drenched in evil intentions. And in the first 2 games, to summarize it without spoiling, because I'm assuming that not everybody that's watching this has played all the games, and is probably just being like, oh, I saw this on the store, I wonder what this is about. That kind of deal. The first 2 games are essentially you getting through your military school, taking on a few missions here and there, and discovering the truth of what actually is going on out in the general public, whether it's the struggle between the poor and the rich, or in this case, the nobility and essentially the peasantry. There's a lot of other outside things. There are a few mystical things in the first 2 games, but it isn't really overly explored. The first 2 games really just dive into struggles. Like the first game deals with a terrorist organization trying to overthrow the government. The second game is an all-out class war between the poor and the rich. And without going any further than that, both games stand really well on their own. I would prefer 2 over 1. I mean, none of them are bad games, but 2 definitely did a lot better in the story aspect than, say, 1 did. But as we get to 3 here, so 3 is the resolution of 2. where you are now graduating from that military school. And ironically enough, at like 17 or 18 years old, I want to say, um, you fall into this weird idea that all of a sudden, like, because you're, I guess, a bit of a hero, being the big shot, out coming out of that graduating class, all of a sudden they're like, you know what? We should make a second one of these military schools. We should have this guy who just graduated our military school teach the kids that are now coming into this new school. So yeah, you basically go from being a student immediately to being a teacher, and now the third game encompasses already everything from the first two games, including all of your old party members. Although they get petered in throughout the game, you don't spend any of the game consistently with characters that you were party membered with in the first two. This is a completely new set of people that you stick with for the course of this third game, which was an interesting choice to me. I always thought that in this kind of a series, you would want to stick with what people know, and they took a real risk here in not only completely giving you new party members, but putting you in an absolutely new setting. So all of it's because it's not just your party members that are part of the military school that you know of. There are a lot of NPC characters that you work with, especially in the second game. They basically throw everybody together. So you already have this like cast of 20 plus people that some you have grown to love, some of them you have grown to like tolerate, but you have a like by the time I finished the second game, I pretty much was okay with almost everybody in that group. And now, as we come into Trails of Cold Steel 3, it completely changes that up. And now puts me with 5 new party members, all of them being my students. The way that Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2 work is that they would have 6 classes. 3 of them, no, I think it was 2 of them were the nobility. Class 1 and 2 were nobility, and classes 3 to 6 were the commoners. And then they put in this Class 7, which was essentially like a special task force. Basically, people, that you would look at and be like, okay, this could be a real special person. There's a lot of potential with this one. Let's throw all of them together, and we're going to give them a slightly different curriculum because we think that these people will really become the bells of our school. And in the case of 1 and 2, there's certainly a lot more. I think off the top of my head, I think it's like 9, maybe give or take 1 or 2. And then as we go into Trails of Cold Steel 3, there's just 5. And actually, in fact, you start at 3. So in the early parts of the game, Class 7 in this new military school is minuscule. Granted, the school itself is minuscule. There's only 2 other classes, and it isn't class separated. There isn't a nobility class, there isn't a commoner class. It's just 2 classes. One, I think, was military finances, and one of them was, what was the other one? It might have had to do with like orbital arts, like the like magic what is in that game. I might be wrong because it's been a while and I'm blanking. I know military finances for sure was one of them. I just can't off the top of my head remember. Maybe I'm actually right, but who knows? But there's nowhere near as many people. So in fact, this group of students, there's nobody in this school are blanket NPCs because there are several of them in the first 2 games. It's just because they got to fill out the ranks. So there's just like nobody's, like not even a name to the person. Now, every single student in this school has a name, has somewhat of a backstory, has reasons for being there, and has a bit of an arc. Some of them smaller than others, and there are definitely some that are far better than others. I mean, immediate for me has been Valerie, who not only is like obviously because it's an anime game, she's a very pretty girl. She's been quite frankly probably the most attractive ones, at least in my opinion, in the entire game. But what also is, in addition, is that she is a nobility from the country that you had just annexed. Because in Trails of Cold Steel 3, in between 2 and 3, you go out. Your main character, I should say, is Rean Schwarzer. He goes out and, by orders of the government, helps them annex a province or a territory, depending on which way you want to look at it. I guess even a country, and takes it over and adds it as a part of the empire that the current chancellor, Gileath Osborne, has been slowly accruing. He's been slowly but surely turning Erebonia into a fledgling empire, and also now includes the state of Crossbell, which you will recognize from what I said earlier, that the Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure games take place in. So the Empire of Erebonia has slowly but surely become a much bigger nation. And when you think about the war with the Republic of Calvard, which is another large empire in this world, it seems like war is a thing gearing up. And Valerie herself is from the annexed territory of Northumbria, that is one of many places that has a little bit of disdain towards Rean, because not even because he did anything bad, like he legitimately is a full-fledged like good guy, but it still comes the thing of guilty by association. You did something the people didn't ask for, so naturally they hold a bit of resentment to you. And I mean, the other thing with her specifically is that also she's a singer and a guitar player. The game has like this weird. They try to make the claim like, oh, Northumbria has like this weird like rock thing. It's like a northern thing. They kind of make it seem like, oh, it's like black metal. They're obviously not playing black metal, but it's basically just basic rock music. But this is a world where essentially music is still classical. So it's almost like this set of music is like the equivalency of like Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis and Little Richard. It's interesting. And again, when you take her look, and then you have this rock band persona that she has, and then not to mention she's one of those characters that's kind of like almost looks somewhat like emotionally not giving a shit, like just doesn't look like she cares, and has just like those weird like eyes of like, I don't give a fuck about what you're telling me, just go away kind of face. I'm a bit of a sucker for those kind of characters in anime, so like she was amazing in itself. But there are so many other NPCs. Like I'm just putting the spotlight on her because that's the one that stood out for me. But there's a lot of them that are very well done, and it's not just the problem with a lot of the Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2 NPCs is that some of them are just literally like they're very, very base. They're very basic. They don't really have too much to add. It's just, oh, this person is the one that's a little posh. Oh, this one's the one who just is a little over smart. Like a lot of the characters here in 3 that aren't your party members and aren't playable characters, they still have a lot to them. Whereas Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2, there were only a few. This time, almost all of them really have like very interesting arcs and personalities to them. So that's also a plus. But the core 5 that you are given I really thought that I was going to struggle, because at first, all 3 of them were not that great. The 3 they give you with is Kurt, who is, I guess you could say, like a basic military guy. Like he grew up in a military family. He's trying to get stronger. Like that's all he's looking for. You have Yuna, who is essentially like, I thought she was just going to be another tsundere. She was just going to be another character who just hates the main character for unknown reasons and doesn't ever say anything about it, and just she slowly warms up to him over time. And then you have Altina, who was a villain in the second game. I can't remember if she was in the first. I may be wrong on that. But she was a villain initially, and then you find out that she was just working with somebody as like a spy on the inside. And she is very emotionless. Like we're talking blanket, like no emotion. And her character slowly develops over time. And all 3 of them at first, I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this. Like I'm not sure that this is what I'm looking for. So the intro to this game was very interesting, because I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to end up liking this, because I'm still sitting there being like, man, I missed the characters from Trails of Cold Steel 2 and 1. I want to have all my original cast back. Why are you forcing me into this completely new situation? And the first few chapters, or sorry, I shouldn't say the first few chapters, because there's only like 6 or 7. The first chapter it's a bit of a slog for like a moment, just because you're in that like heyday of trying to understand all these people. But that was the same case of Trails of Cold Steel 1. I was trying to figure out who I liked and what I did. The only advantage of Trails of Cold Steel 3 is that I'm already familiar with the battle system, and that learning process was already gone, minus a few changes. So some of the changes, since we might as well talk about it, the system used to operate on like a ring. So there'd be a circle, and you go around trying to pick the thing that you want. This time it's just straight up a button press. So if you want just a straight attack, you just hit X like you normally would. But if you want to access something like, say, skills, it's a certain button on the D-pad. Or if you want to access magic, it's a certain button. If you want to access the new Brave system, that's a whole button. And the Brave system basically was, or sorry, the Brave Order system in full. You know, they've always have things on this like a timer that certain things will act for certain turns. And what the Brave Order system does is that for you have a maximum of 5 points. So there are some skills you can use that cost 1. Some of them can cost, I think, all 5. I can't remember. I think that would be the case because some of them are really good. And some of them would do things like say, okay, if you activate this one, you restore 10% of everybody's HP and EP, which is basically like their magic points. Everybody should know what HP is. I hope if you're a JRPG expert, you know what that is. It would be that, and I'm trying to think what was the other. I think it was like status effects go away maybe. So there's like a really like quick heal thing. There's one that would raise like critical rates up. There's one that raises just straight up attacks will do more damage. Magic will do more damage. Evasion can go up. Some cases it costs you nothing to cast any magic. Sometimes I think there was one that straight up is an instant spell. So because spells take a little bit of time to be casted in this game. So I think there was one that's like it just costs you nothing and it's instant. So there's stuff like that that kind of adds a little bit of extra to the battlefield. And for example, what I would do towards the end of the game when I had some really disgusting builds, which I'll get into later when I talk about the later parts of the game. There's one specifically that I would use that would increase critical rates. So that way I would be constantly getting extra attacks because normally in like a lot of battle systems today in JRPGs, if you do a critical hit or if you do something special, you can get like a follow-up. And that's what happens here. You link up with one other party member. You have as many as 4 on the field, so you can have 2 pairs. And if you hit either a critical or you hit like a weak spot, so whether like maybe the person that you're fighting is weak to slash attacks or weak to a pierce attack like with a spear or a gun, if you do that, you get a follow-up. And if you do that, you know, it's extra damage. Sometimes these can add extra pieces to it. So like if the person's HP is really low, the character will do a 3rd attack to finish it off. Sometimes they'll do things like if a person gets hit, they'll immediately heal them, or they'll get mad and their combat points, which are for their skills, will increase a little bit. There are all these little extra things you can compound onto each other and just end up really adding to things. And then lastly, I was still talking with the ring system. There would be a button for items. So basically, you have items, orders, skills, and magic. And then there are a whole other subset that you can do for changing party members and stuff like that. So the battle system was already infinitely improved. I was really happy with that system because the ring system was a little bit like it was very basic because it wasn't really anything in particular. It was just how you access stuff. And the problem is if you wanted something specific, it would always be right, like something you would want would be right at the end. So you have to hit it several times to get to it, where now it's just hit that button, you're there. And so it's just a little bit smoother. The battle system also adds a few other things. Like I said, the Brave Order. There's the break system. So there is another meter along with the enemy's HP that if you get that down, it goes into a break state. So it doesn't attack for a set amount of turns. And it also has increased damage, the output. So you can now really wail. Like you throw everything you got at that point if you really want to go crazy, especially in boss battles. If you can hit a breakpoint, that is a game changer because that A gives you a chance to either heal up if you're in real trouble, or you throw your massive attack, like your best skills, your ultimate finishing moves. You do whatever you can to put as much damage on that person as you can. So it ends up being another facet of the battle system that just adds to the intensity of it, because in certain boss battles, that can make or break your fight, depending on what difficulty you play on. And then the last thing, but it's a very small change because it only happens for one person, they have a style change system. So Yuna specifically has what I can only describe as being like nunchucks that also double as guns. So as she's holding them, she can switch from strike mode, so she just like smacks them with what I can only describe, like I said, are like just giant nunchucks. Or she goes into gunner mode, so she now has the ability to shoot them with them. And there also is special bonuses to it. So the strike one apparently has a little bit more damage output. The gunner one you can use from further away, but it also can encompass more than one enemy. So if there are 2 enemies close together or even more, you can shoot multiple enemies at the same time. So it ends up working out nicely for creating more damage faster on more enemies so you can kind of spread it out a little bit better and get some of these enemies down quicker rather than just going one by one. Now, the problem with that system, and this is one of the very few issues that I have with this game, is I didn't feel like the striker option was really that important. I found that the damage output for Gunner wasn't that different, so I just ended up using Gunner because, it keeps her further away, so she's less likely to take hits, so I could have my more tank characters in the front and just keep her in the back just shooting. But also, like I said, you attack more enemies, so if you're getting more enemies and similar amounts of damage, there's no point in sticking with the striker. So I never ended up using striker very much, but all these changes were relatively interesting and I was welcoming to them. So after all that, we get into the biggest question: how's the story? So this part here, it's non-spoiler. As soon as I get to spoilers, I will tell you guys. I will even put on the screen the timestamp on the video when this is. I apologize in advance if you're going to be listening to this on audio. So I may edit in a audio cue just to tell you guys. I think that's probably what I'll end up doing. But yeah, there will be a point where for the rest of the show until I close it off, there will be spoilers. So, without spoiling it, like I said earlier, the first act is a little bit difficult just in the early stages because, getting used to new characters after already being predispositioned to really love this set of characters that I've grown up for 2 games with. But as the game progresses and also adds 2 more characters to your party, that being Ash and Muse, you really get a very well-rounded party. Because like I said, you have Kurt, who is your stoic, military guy. You have Yuna, who, as soon as the game starts to open up a little bit more, I started not only really liking her, she slowly became oh shit. The romantic interest part of this game, because of course it is, because it's Japan. People have tried to compare Trails of Cold Steel as a harem game, and I can kind of see it, but again, I don't even look at the harem part as being a major part of it because the political struggle story is so much more a focal point. The harem stuff is more the side stuff that you get when the key parts of the story are done and you're in the in-between chapters of the game. But yeah, Yuna became a lot better of a character over time, and the same went for Altina. Altina was eh. And then by the end of it, I'm oh, there's some real charm here. And then you had Ash and Muse, who have their own quirks. Ash being the bad boy, the one who's always getting into trouble, and then Muse just being the over-the-top flirtatious girl. There's a good mix between these 5, and then when you also end up bringing that into the various NPCs and as a part of the school, the few bits of faculty, one of them being Toa, who is from the first 2 Trails games. So you at least get somebody within the first 2 games with you at all times, so there is that. And then not to mention all your party members from the previous 2 games, they get littered in here without, and they mix very well with all these characters. And that also still includes the NPCs from the previous 2 games as well. There are so many characters in this series now after 3 games, and they're probably going to add more in 4. Not to mention, they've started in the 3rd game really more often than not start to litter in characters from Trails in the Sky and Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure. The Crossbell arc is more of a more major piece of this specific game. The Trails in the Sky stuff, people's names get mentioned a lot, but not very many of them really play a part in it. In this game, it's more the Trails of Zero and Trails of Azure, the Crossbell guys Randy, Tio, Tita, Agate, or Agate, I think it was. Sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing. So a lot of that arc is more important, which is why I had to research those 2 games in specific, because not only did I not know anything about them, they also weren't released in North America and still haven't been. So the information on them was pretty sparse. And because it wasn't as commonly known, it was a little bit harder to dig for. And I still don't really know a lot of everything, but as Trails of Cold Steel 3 ended, I got a better sense of it, even just from listening to all the stories that these characters would tell, whether it's just in text form or in cutscenes. There definitely is a lot of storytelling that, some people will tell you, like I said earlier, that you have to play the previous 5. I think that's not true. Although there are going to be points in the game where you're okay, I'm sure this is supposed to be a thing, and you just try to make assumptions based on what you hear, which is what I spent some of the game doing, but for the most part, I didn't feel lost. It just got to a point where there were so many characters that came up that I'm okay, I just need to at least research who these people are so I can at least get a sense of what they're trying to do. But otherwise, character-wise, this entire game does a fantastic job at taking several characters and really doing a great job of telling a good story with all of them. Most of them have very valuable arcs. Now, some of them you can miss because some, like the way that the character system kind of goes is they have a book, like a menu in this thing that's like books, like it keeps track of everything that you do, whether it's side activities, anything that you collect, but they also carry stories and like summaries of the character arcs of people, and sometimes you don't always get them. Some of them you have to actually go up to them and talk to them, and sometimes in the off hours of the chapters, like in between moments, it very much kind of like how the Persona games will let you go and like hang out with some of your friends. It does the same here, where for your party members and for like a few other people that aren't in your party, you can spend time with them, but you only get a select few opportunities. So you can't do everybody. You can't just talk to everybody. I kind of dislike that system still to an extent because I would rather just get everything. Like I don't know why I have to choose, especially when it seems like there's no semblance of time. Like it's not like when as soon as you finish, like let's say you get 3 points, so you can use 3 different people and get 3 different like moments. As soon as you do all 3, it's not like the game stops and puts you into the next chapter. There's still side activities you can do, so the perception of time isn't there. So you can argue that you can still go and talk to everybody because it doesn't seem like time is that linear. So that was a little bit irritating. But sometimes you can miss little snippets, but it's not like it's important stuff. The real important stuff will come out in cutscenes that you cannot skip. So it's more like little like tidbits and like little like funny little things about it that are a thing. But a lot of the character arcs are fantastic. Ash was a really interesting one. Muse was a bit of a surprise. Yuna, like I said, just became fantastic. She's a character, and this is still going to go through in Trails of Cold Steel 4. There's a lot of unresolved stuff with her that I can't wait to see get finished off. And yeah, like that's even just counting like the main cast. All the cast from the first 2 games, there's a lot of stuff in that too. And one in particular goes through a moment that gets really emotional for me, and I'll get into the spoilers, but I don't want to spoil that here, obviously, because it's a pretty pivotal moment in the game. But as of the story, without spoiling the key plots, what I can tell you is that the first few chapters do what they do, what a lot of games do when they try to introduce you to a new set of characters, a new world. It really tries to hide what's going on. It piques your interest and kind of tells you, hey, something's going on. You don't know what, but something's going to happen soon. And it just kind of keeps you on that point of like, all right, when's shit going to hit the fan? When's like, because there's moments where like bad things will happen, but it's minor stuff and stuff that you can overcome. You're just sitting there waiting, all right, when's the big thing happening? When's the big fuck up happen? Because in Trails of Cold Steel 1, people will know there were hints of like something big's coming, and you're waiting, what's it going to be? And then towards the final act when it goes, you're like, oh shit. So that moment keeps coming in 3, and you're waiting to find out, okay, what is it? What is it? What is it? And then when you get to that final dungeon and you get to that moment, you're like, okay, where are we going with this? Okay, we're getting close. We're getting close. We're getting close. What's going to happen oh my god. And that's exactly what Trails of Cold Steel 3 runs. It keeps you busy with a bunch of small stories in the early stage that all together connect into this big ending that, without again spoiling it, is one of the hardest endings I have played through in a long time. And I don't mean hard by difficulty. I mean, I legit, when I finished the game, because I was at the final dungeon, saved, went to bed that night, came up in the morning. It was I couldn't sleep for whatever reason, and I don't think it had anything to do with the game, but it was like 6, 7 in the morning, and I'm like, screw it, I'll just finish this game. I'm pretty sure I have like maybe 5, 6 hours left. I only had 2. And I finished this game around like 9 in the morning. And then I sat there. And I sat there some more. And I sat there some more. And it took until about 2, 3 in the afternoon for me to finally get an urge to do something. Like I just kind of sat around and thought about the game. I obviously just did like small tasks just to kind of keep myself busy, but I didn't have any urge to play any games. I didn't have an urge to watch any anime. Like anything story wise, I couldn't do because my heart was just broke. Because what happens at the end of that game is soul crushing and it's shocking. And it made me really upset that I didn't finish this game the same time the Trails of Cold Steel 4 came out because I wasn't wanting to be patient about it. It's one of those things where it's like I felt horrible, but not because it was like a waste of time or it was bullshit. No, I finished that game being like, fuck. And, I sat on it for a while, and I said on the VCR podcast when I finished talking about that game and kind of put it to bed on the show, I said, this has the potential, recency bias aside, down the road, this may be a game that I consider to be not only one of the best I've ever played, but quite possibly the best game I've ever played. All the stuff before the end are a mix. Like there's some stuff that's really good, and then some stuff that's like, eh. There's a specific arc that takes place in Crossbell that really nails it home that this game is going to be going heavy. And the end of that arc really put me on notice to be like, all right, I think the fun and games of this series is over. And even though there is the harem stuff littered, even though there is like the comedy stuff is still there, I think that this is definitely the turning point where, yeah, story-wise, we're not having fun anymore. This is going to be strictly political struggle and potential war and things that are just not going to be fun for these characters as they grow at a very young age, because this is a lot for somebody at the age of like 15, 16, 17, 18 to handle. And that's exactly what this game ended up being. The first game is a lot lighter. There's a few bits here and there. There is more like the rich versus poor dynamic, which does that really well, but it doesn't really bear its fangs until the very end. 2 bears its fangs, will remind you that it bore its fangs, does it a little bit more, takes a bit of a break, and you kind of work your way back to the nitty-gritty again. The third one straight up is like, okay, clean slate, we're going to have you slowly settle in again, and then bam, just goes right back into it again. And man, without, like I said, spoiling anything, this has been a really up and down story in this third game. It had its moments early on, kind of petered off, went up really hard again, petered off again, and then towards the end, it just shot through the frickin' roof. And like, man, I cannot wait for the fall. It's not officially dated yet, but we're assuming it's the fall is the date for Trails of Cold Steel 4 here in the West. And yeah, like, I don't normally make a lot of day one purchases these days. This is a day one for me. I don't have a choice. Like, I'm praying to God that I have time. Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, depending on when this game comes out, it may not be a day one purchase, just on the aspect that I will be playing Cyberpunk at that point. That's going to be interesting. If Trails of Cold Steel 4 comes out before Cyberpunk, what do I do? Oh, that's going to be interesting. I don't know how I'm going to handle this, but that's a whole nother story. But like, let's assume that nothing's in the way. That's a day one purchase without question. Like, not even thinking about it. Because the finale, essentially, because I'm led to believe that this is the finale, because there is another game that they're already in production on, but it sounds like it's a post of this 4-game series. So I would be led to believe that the game that we're getting towards the end is definitely a finish. And if this is the cliffhanger before it, it was a hell of a cliffhanger, and a really heavy cliffhanger, one that I struggled with. But yeah, overall in terms of story, it's a mix. There are definitely parts of the game that are a little bit more fillery, but it's a JRPG. I took over like 120 plus hours into this thing, so it's gonna happen. But for the most part, the actual story content itself is great. Now, the last thing I'll do before I get into spoiler territory is take a bit of an aside to the side stuff. Encompassing everything, like the smaller stuff, like there's a card game you can play that's similar to like a Hearthstone sort of deal. That one's all right. I had a little bit of fun doing that. It's not really overly challenging. In fact, I didn't really use many of the class cards because they have like different classes. So there's like like I think like a hunt, or I think it's a ranger, a warrior, a priest, like witch. Like there's a lot of these things. I basically use like two. I used the ranger because it can attack from the back row and not take any damage. So I would just like overpower that. Or if it was a really over the top enemy, I would use the swordsman towards the end, which has a lot of HP but can also get high attack really quick. So it was more just like there wasn't really a lot of strategy. It was just I'm gonna make this deck so that anything that I put on the field is OP. Like that's basically what that game was. It's still fun. It wasn't over the top. There's a lot of stuff you can do on the side, like obviously collecting items and stuff. There are things like fishing, cooking. There's all these little side activities you can do that are kind of fun. Side quests, like I said, with the whole bonding points thing that you can do where you can kind of go out with certain people and get stuff. That was interesting. Some of them, again, like I said, with the story are up and down. Some of them just, they're not as interesting. Like a lot of the times, I wouldn't even pick based on the bond ratings, like because you can go up to 5 stars in these people, and if you get 5 stars, I don't know if there's an actual like perk to it. I think it's just achievements. So I don't know if it was that big a deal. But a lot of the times what I would do is I would talk to every person individually just to see what they were talking about. Like they would give a hint on what they were going to do. So there were certain ones that'd be like, I want to see what the hell that does. Like there's one specifically, it's like, hey, I think this person that we know is going on a date. I'm going to go eavesdrop on them. Do you want to come with me? And I'm like, yeah, damn right I want to see what's going on here. So that was kind of the extent of that. Those are pretty fun. But for the most part, what I want to talk about on the side here is what people have attributed to being the harem aspect of this game. So apart from the story, the game has made no bones about it in the first 2 games even alone that Rean is the dunce cap main character that all the girls seem to like, and he doesn't seem to know that they all like him. I attribute it to something like Ichika from the anime Infinite Stratos, who has everybody vying for his attention, and he's just a dumbass who doesn't see it. I think Rean is actually pretty aware. It's just that he's also this very honorable guy. Like, for fuck's sakes, like in the 3rd game, several women friggin' give him a kiss on the cheek, and he blushes. So I don't think that he's not aware that there's some people. And in fact, in this 3rd game, well, I mean, in the first 2 games, you can technically like start a relationship. It's just in the 3rd game, like an actual kiss happens. And I have a bone to pick with the 3rd game because they only give you 3 options. In the first 2 games, you were able to pick any of the party members, and I think you can even, I don't know if you can pick the teacher. I can't remember. But in the 3rd game, it doesn't even let you pick any of the new girls. It doesn't let you pick even all of the party members. Like there's one specific party member that I picked in Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2 that I can't pick in 3. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what was the point of all this? Because transferring games from 1 and 2 is almost like if you play like a Mass Effect or whatever. If whatever you did in the first in the Mass Effect games carried over, whatever you decided in the first game for relationships did carry over into 2, but it doesn't carry over into 3. So everything's clean slate again, and it's weird because now it goes back to, instead of it being pretty obvious that one girl has fallen for you, it's now everyone. And I guess people took a little bit of umbrage with that. And I can understand it if you're not into the harem aspect of stuff. Obviously, when it's a male character, you know, there are going to be people that are put off because, again, it's not there's no chance to have the opposite effect. There's no chance to have the girl that's surrounded by dudes. So I get that. And I mean, even as a bisexual man, there were a couple of guys that I'm like, man, like I wouldn't even be shocked if some of the guys went after Rean too. And I wouldn't be opposed to that either, but none of that really happens. It's definitely still a game that's designed for, I guess, a straight male, or at least a bisexual male that's into women, you know? I don't fault him for it because, again, the core audience, I guess, for these games in Japan tends to be male. And it's not like they don't have options for women either. And I mean, even then, like, this is still a game that women can enjoy. It's just, yeah, this is heavy on the harem stuff, and it's also a lot heavier on the, I guess, the sexual content of it. As, like, you have a moment where Yuna showers. I don't remember there being a showering scene in the first 2 games. There's also a notorious scene that I can recall where I think I realized how, like, this game was definitely starting to turn more of an anime, like a ecchi content sort of deal, where you see 2 villains. One of them being Duvali, who is a character that you've seen since the first game, I think, or was it the second? Maybe I'm wrong, but she's definitely been around in the first 2 games. And a new character named Shirley, who I can only attribute to being like looks like a punk girl, like absolutely like a roller derby girl going on. And while they're scheming about what they're gonna do next, she gets bored, Shirley, and just out of nowhere gets behind Duvally, and she's wearing like full armor, but she has like plate armor on her chest. Reaches underneath the plate armor and just starts grabbing, and I'm like, whoa. I wasn't opposed to it, but I'm like, okay, I don't remember this kind of stuff really happening in the first two games. And then when you couple that with Muse being as flirtatious as she is, I mean, not to mention that there is a bath in the dormitory that you take place in, and every single chance you get free time, you can go in there, and sometimes it's a guy, but more often than not, it's a girl because the girls seem to litter it more often. Because again, of course it would, based on the way that the game is being made and who it's being made for, and not to mention, uh, just the fact that like basically every person with female genitalia basically wants to get in Rean's pants. I mean, the NPCs seem to be the ones that aren't that interested, but anybody who has an actual like full role in this game, they all want them. Like even there's even like hints that like one of the NPC characters named Claire, who is part of the first two games, even she, who has never really been like a major character, is even like, you know what, he's definitely younger than me, but I might think about it. It's there. I think there's really only like one character in the original two games in particular, every party members that doesn't, and that's because if they did, it would be gross because the girl looks like she's 11. So yeah, I guess it makes sense that that one isn't interested. And it even kind of makes the case of Yuna is a little bit interested, although it's not fully fleshed out. Altina really isn't. She's more just like, I like being around him because I feel like I can get my shit done. Like she's still like very much thinking of in the eyes of like an operative because she was an agent. So she's thinking, okay, when I'm with him, we accomplish stuff. I like that. I appreciate it because I get praised. So I don't know if there's necessarily a romantic uh, option with her, but basically like every major female character in that game is pretty much interested in him, and that kind of plays out to, like I said earlier, him being a bit of a dunce cap and acting like he doesn't know. I think he actually is a pretty good idea, but he tries to hide it because, especially in this game where he's trying to be a professional, with being a teacher, I think he's trying to kind of get away from that. I have a suspicion that maybe in the first two games he probably was suspicious, but man, the guy's old enough, he's matured enough that I think he should probably be able to see it, but you never know. So at this point, I don't know how long I'm going to spend on it, but this is going to be spoiler territory. This is full spoiler territory. So at this point, I will be putting up the timestamp here on the screen. So whatever you see on the screen, if you want to get to the end where I conclude this entire review, go to that point because anything from here on out is all spoilers. So if you haven't played this game, skip to that timestamp. And same goes for audio users. At this point right now, as I take a momentary pause, I will tell you the timestamp, and then we will get to that point. So we are going to get to spoiler territory in 3, 2, 1. So right off the bat, Milliam. I said earlier in this review that I struggled to do anything after that. It's crazy because I knew just by happenstance, because through Google searching through images and artwork, because fucking Google searching sometimes yields results that I don't appreciate. I remember at one point, I think I was just doing like I was just looking for artwork for all the characters, and I searched up Milliam, and naturally Milliam Death came up. So I knew that she was going. And in fact, there was another moment earlier in the game that I thought it was coming, where she was ensnared on that island. I thought, oh shit. It's crazy when you think about it that a game actually had her in danger more than once. And the thing that got her actually killed was her saving you, which was crazy. And I knew somebody had to die in this game. And when it seemed to get leaked to me that Milliam was going to be one of them, I prepared myself for it and thought, okay, well, I wasn't the biggest Milliam fan, and it also didn't help too that her character has a completely new voice actress because Ashley Birch was doing the voice before, and I can't remember the name of the person who did it in this game, but um, you know, I was already a little bit perturbed because I'm like, it's not even the real Milliam right now, so who cares? As soon as she went, the way that it happened, I was like, fuck. I don't cry very often in games. I didn't necessarily like tear up, but I welled up and I just had to wipe it away a bit, but I didn't like flat out like drip. Um, but that one hurt. And then if we're talking deaths, um, obviously we have to talk about the ship being destroyed. We have to talk about Toval, um, Olivert, and I'm forgetting what Laura's dad's name is right now, but the Radiant Blade Master. All three of them are gone. Now, I have my suspicions that they're not, but I can still fully believe that this is a true thing that's happened. I think that's a key moment for a big reason. It's going to get some villains to change sides because you could even hear a lot of them say that's cold, that's bullshit. Because even though they're bad guys, they still have a code. They still have honor. They're like, no, if we're gonna kill somebody, it's giving them the chance to defend themselves. This straight up was a murder. This was a classless murder because they put a bomb in their ship. And it hurts even more for some people because Oliver's been around since Trails in the Sky. Oliver has been around forever. So if you've been playing the Trails in the Sky games, to watch him die like that has to hurt. I mean, it hurt already for me, just as being somebody who's only played from Cold Steel on. But to see it like that. And that's why there's a part of a suspicion of me that maybe something is okay. Like, maybe in some crazy thing they found a way out of it. But, it looks like they're gone, and I'm not necessarily, like that upset when it comes to the Blade Master and Toval, because I don't think either of them really, like, were that interesting to me. The only thing the Blade Master has going for him is he's got a voice actor that I really just love his voice. But Toval I didn't really have much of a care for. Oliver was like, oh crap, like that's the person who pretty much ran everything into motion. So that one definitely struck harder. But yeah, like we had 4 major characters die off. Well, I guess really one major character and a couple like pretty big characters. But yeah, that was really difficult. But I mean, you know, it's one of those things that just makes me wanting to play the 4th game, really just hammer that shit down. Moving on to other things, like I said, the crossbow arc really got my attention. To see Yuna break out of that, you know, honestly, I thought she was just going to be the bitch character of this game early on. And, you know, as she started, like, loosening up just a little bit, I'm like, okay, like, maybe she's not that bad. As soon as the crossbow arc starts and really starts to get going, I'm like, oh, shit, now I'm really starting to feel for this character. And by the end of it, I'm like, oh, man. I think I might love this character. And by the end of this game, I get the feeling that Yuna is going to be the front and center in this 4th game. I think she might actually be the one leading the charge. And it makes sense. Like she's the one that really has the most to fight for because she was really the one that took the biggest emotional toll. I mean, Laura's obviously got a lot to fight for because her father's dead now. But in terms of all the other characters, like nobody else has really lost as much as Yuna and Laura at this point, as far as I can remember. So just based on the 3rd game being the most recent game, I figure Yuna's going to be the one leading the charge. So it'll be really interesting to see where that goes. Let's see. I'm just scrolling through some of the story to see if there's anything that like I can miss. I can't really say much about all the side chapters personally. I mean, I thought it was a little bit weird that they started you off in one of the chapters much later in the game and just kind of expanded upon it. Not to mention added a little bit extra, like, oh, Angelica was there with the group when this was all going on. Some of it was a little bit weird. I thought the way that they told it was a little bit strange. I think they could have just simply done it anywhere else. Like, they could have just done it as... They literally could have done the tutorial in the fucking keep. Like, I don't understand why they had to start us off in the fortress. It just felt weird. But since I mentioned her name, Angelica, that's another one that I'm suspicious of. Obviously, they're saying that George, or Georg, who is part of the gnomes, the people that created all the divine knights, because we really into the mystical stuff here, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But they're saying he killed her in cold blood with a pistol, and because the screen goes black, I also refuse to believe that. Because if there is any death I'm going to assume that is not true, it's hers, because you see Milliam die. You see the ship explode that the Blade Master, Olivert, and Toval are on. So I am willing to believe that those four are probably dead, especially Milliam. But Angelica, I'm not willing to believe because you didn't show me anything. That's the one that's tougher to stomach. What else here before I get into the mystical stuff? Crow was not a surprise. You know, it's what as soon as Gileath was killed off in 1 and came back in 2, my brain went, I can't trust any deaths. That's why I'm also suspicious about Angelica, and I'm suspicious about the 3 that died in the I keep forgetting the name of the plane. There we go, the Courageous. I keep assuming that anybody that died on the Courageous is not true. The only one that I can definitely see is Milliam, but then again, Milliam is from the Black Workshop. You never know if that can come into play. I mean, technically she lives on because she was infused into the weapon, so you never know. There might be some way of bringing her back, but in terms of all the deaths that we saw, I can leave the opening to all of them being able to come back, especially for a big final battle. Next up here, I'm going to briefly talk about one of the things that I had to research for. This is the arc where you go into the village of Hamel. That story is another part of when I started to realize that this game is going to stop pulling its punches and really go deep, dark. The idea that I didn't know about this, and if it was talked about in Trails of the Sky, that's a pretty interesting story to go back to. But the idea that just for political gain, just for status, a bunch of people were just innocently murdered. And the only ones being left were thought to be Joshua and Estelle. Or, sorry, I don't think it was both of them, because I think one of them was different. But I'm pretty sure Joshua was one. I can't think of who the second... I think I'm wrong that it's an Estelle, so I think it's one other person. But to find out that there was a third, and Ash was that person, makes you go, okay, so we've definitely got some unfinished business that's going to go forward. And with Ash, too, to kind of go on to his side, him having this weird, like, possession thing, kind of like what Rean has with his ogre power. Although in his case, I think it just turns him to, like he makes him crazy. Like, he has his voice in his head that's telling him to do things he doesn't want to do. So he didn't kill the Emperor. It seems like the Emperor's going to survive this. Unlike Chancellor Osborne, who was perceived to be dead and then came back. It looks like the Emperor just received more, like, critical wounds, but it looks like he'll survive. But that was an interesting moment, too. But yeah, Hamel was like, oh shit, that's some heavy shit. Other than that, Muse being, I had no idea, because I knew Muse was not who she said she was because it kept being referred to. But I'm like, who the hell is it? And I felt it was weird too when she was talking on, where were they when this happened? It was when they were at the, it was when they were in the Crossbell arc. Before they went to the roof and finished off that arc, where she was talking with Alphine and Elise, and I think they were half calling her Mildine. I think they just stopped it at Mild. And I sat there and being like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, it wasn't a clue to anything, right? Like, I don't remember there being anything in Trails of Cold Steel that mentioned, like, a daughter that could have been the Countess, the Duchess Cayenne. I don't recall that ever being spoken, so even if they had said her name in full, it wouldn't have changed anything. It just would have been like, oh, so she's not who she says she was. So that's exactly the sense I got when they just didn't finish the sentence. So that part was a little bit weird, but I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. You know, I thought that maybe she's some secret, like, spy or whatever else, and that turned out to be Ash. That's a different story. But for Muse to turn out to be Mildine, a fucking descendant of the Cayenne family, and now has taken the role of replacing the Duke, who, by the way, Marquis Ballard, what a piece of shit. That's a character that I wish we were fighting, because, man, that guy was up there with Duke Cayenne in terms of douchebaggery. But yeah, for her to turn out to end up being the Duchess was interesting. I didn't expect that. That was pretty neat. Let's see, what else? because I'll get into the mystical stuff at the end. I'm just scrolling here trying to think what else there might have been. The crossbow arc I've already kind of gone through. I guess I'll briefly talk about Erebonia, or I guess the Steel Maiden coming back, being the Lance, or she's the Steel Maiden now, was the Lance Maiden. That's when we start getting into the mysticism, I guess. I'm just trying to think if there was anything else spoilery before I get into the mystic stuff that's just it's kind of interesting. I mean, Fee's dad being, again, it just goes back to the I don't trust anybody being dead thing. I don't like. I'll keep scrolling as I talk about the mystical stuff, but I don't really think of much else other than like Milliam losing control. But I think we'll get into more of that when we talk about the Black Workshop in full in the fourth game. Other than that, I mean, I guess like that was loud. I apologize for that. Somebody just like really slammed the door somewhere out in my apartment building. Yeah, I guess the romantic stuff, like I don't like the fact that they only gave us the options of Laura, Elise, and Emma. Like, Fee wasn't even included. They also hint that Sarah definitely has feelings for him. Claire even has feelings for him. So it's just one of those things where it's like, man, like I don't get where they got off like just limiting it to 3 people, and not to mention, like I ended up just because I wanted to see where it went. I just picked Laura for the sake of picking Laura. I hope that I have the option to change my mind in the 4th game. Because it seems like you might get more options in the 4th game from what I've tried really hard to loosely research Trails of Cold Steel 4 because I don't want to get spoiled on anything again like I did with Milliam. But yeah, like, oh, there was the last thing. Gaia suddenly being part of the fucking Septian Church. I'm like, what? Where does this come from? They're just saying that, you know, I'm forgetting his name, but the professor with the glasses, that's a part of that. Same with, oh, what's the girl's name? The blonde. Shit, I'm blanking. Rosine, there we go. The fact that he's now a part of that, I thought was very strange because it didn't seem like much of a fit. I think it was just their way of like keeping him away long enough to have the last person of Class 7 to finally come in. So there's a big thing. And all of a sudden, they've put Gaius up there as being like potentially the most powerful person in the party next to Rean, which is interesting. That's not who I would have picked. I mean, I could have gone with other options, but I guess that's a thing. That was a bit strange. Oh, Instructor Thomas was his name. There we go. I'm slowly like remembering things as we go. But yeah, otherwise, let's just talk. Actually, you know what? I'll talk about Thors just for a moment. The Cedric stuff, I didn't care for that much. I thought it was a little bit weird that the guy that you saved all of a sudden is becoming the villain, which was strange. They don't really resolve any of that. It seems like everybody just kind of goes, well, I guess we have to put all this shit aside. Because look at what's happening. But, yeah, the whole thing with Thors becoming this weird, like, villainous part of the school, I didn't care for much because I would assume with Principal Van Dyke and all the staff still being there that they would be like, all right, Cedric, you put a stop to that bullshit. I don't care that you're royalty. But that was weird. The new school, I definitely prefer more just because they treated them better. Also, Aurelia just became a much better character. I love the fact that she just became this character that gives no fucks in terms of like of boundaries. Like she's just like screw it. You know, everybody else gets a one-piece swimsuit. I'm gonna walk it out with a bikini. Like I don't give a fuck. In fact, as soon as I unlock that costume on her, because you have all the extra costumes, normally I would use the fun costumes and like the bikini stuff and all the swimsuit stuff towards like the off missions, like the keep stuff and whatever else. As soon as I unlocked that, I left it on her because I figured it made sense with her. Like she just gave no shits. She's like, screw wearing like my traditional like nobility outfit. No, I'm just gonna walk around in a bikini because I don't give a fuck. Because I felt it just suited her, and it just ended up making some of these scenes even funnier because people always looked at her and be like, "Wow, that's so interesting of her to think that." Or like, yeah, that sounds like her to take that interesting approach. And then there she is standing in a bikini, just flaunting herself everywhere. I just love that little bit of it. But yeah, so talking about all the mystic stuff. Towards the end of the second game, when you start dealing with the Great One and shit like that, it lost me a little bit. I still am kind of lost as we get to the end of this game. I still prefer this game for its political struggles. I still prefer the game for the class struggles. Now that we're bringing in the mysticism and like the Great One, and now we had the Great Twilight starting, and the curse was unleashed, and you had all this extra stuff with the Black Workshop and the gnomes and the Divine Knights and all this stuff. it started to get to a point where it might be a little bit convoluted, but thankfully the story is so good without it that it still rises to the top. Like I said at the top of the show, this is a show that I'm looking at as being one of my favorite games ever, and that's still including all the things that I hate about it. You know, actually, I didn't even talk about this before. You know what? I'll save that for when I get back to the conclusion, because this is something of the non-spoiler stuff I could also say. But the mysticism stuff with everything towards the end of the last dungeon, you know, I'm like, man, I don't know how I feel about this, because it's starting to get into the silly aspect. It's starting to get into the prophecies, and I'm just trying to do what I think the best is for the world by destroying it. I always hate that character. Like, Gileath Osborne is not Kefka. Kefka wants to end the world. He just wants to see it burn. Gileath seems to think this will be better. And I'm trying difficult to understand any time that a villain says it's better for the world if it starts anew. I don't like that. I think that's stupid, because again, spoiler alert to the villain, you die too. I don't understand those motivations. But I mean, again, it's as a guy who never wants to die, I guess I can't understand those points of view. But as soon as we got to like the mystical stuff, you know, I didn't have a problem with the portals being opened and all these mythical beasts coming out. That's fine. As soon as we got into all this crazy prophecy stuff with the Great Twilight and everything else, I'm like, man, you're really pushing it, because I was really interested in the story because Osborne was just becoming a dictator. He was becoming an authoritarian. He wanted to run the world under his domain. He wanted it to be under his rules. You could have run with that story and just been fine. As soon as now it's gotten to the point that he wants to just end the world, I'm like, no, this isn't a dictator anymore. This is just a crazy person. And now it's kind of taken away my interest in him. So hopefully Trails of Cold Steel 4 is able to recover at least that little bit that I'm not too happy about. But, you know, all that stuff is just so weird to me. And the fact that all these people are starting to slowly switch sides, like Vita seems to have turned another leaf. I'm getting the sense that Duvali is going to turn in the fourth game, because she looked especially unsure of what was going on early on. Like, as soon as the Lance Maiden, now the Steel Maiden, was siding with this crazy end of the world stuff, she's like, okay, I know I'm going to follow her because like she's done so much for me. But you could see the bit of doubt. And towards the end, when the Courageous was blown up, you could see several of these villains that, you know, were still fighting on their side at the end of the game. You can see that some of them were not fucking happy. You could see that a lot of them were like, dude, that's fucking bullshit. Like, even the ones that were like, I thought were going to be people that I hate all the way through, even they were like, dude, that's uncalled for. That's not cool. That's not right. And that was the intrigue of that point too, where I think we're now going to see a point where lines are drawn and we've seen who really is evil and who really was just somebody following orders. In the same vein that Hitler was truly evil, but not every Nazi was evil, because they were Germans that were just following what they thought was what was best for their country, because that's what they were told. Because not everybody in Ouroboros, not everybody that's being paid by Ouroboros actually believes everything that they are going for. Especially now that Osborne has been thrust into it and is taking control of everything. I'm not sure that all of them are going to be cool with that either, because now it's not the original vision. And not to mention, like, some of them were just soldiers that got joined in because their leader joined Ouroboros. So there's also that hint of they're going to be people defecting because they can't support what's going on anymore. And especially when you think the world's going to fucking end and they don't want to fucking die, there's a few of them that's going to be like, I'm going to try to stop this, you know? So there's that. Is there anything else that I can think of that I could perceive as something needing to be told here before we get back into the end? I guess all I can say is it seems like Rean is permanently in the ogre state. That seems to be what was told to us at the end. And the trailers seem to show that as well, because you see him like magically chained to a wall, and he's still in full silver hair and red eyes. He's still got the demon eyes going. So the question becomes, how do they pull him out of it? Because the claim is being made that he's permanently there. So you have one option. You have him controlling it. But does that mean he goes back to black-haired Rean? I don't know. I would assume yes, because I mean everything can get changed. It's a video game. It's a Japanese RPG. They find ways all the time. But that's going to be the intrigue, is we're finally going to have a game that doesn't have Rean at the helm right away. And in fact, I think it would be really interesting if he's not there at all. If it takes the end of the game to release him. I have the feeling that it'll probably be in the early part, like the first act of the game will probably be releasing him, and the next two acts will be them trying to reverse the damage that Osborn has done. It may even be quicker than that. It may even be in the first chapter they release him. I don't think it'll be that quick, but I figure the first act is when we'll see it. But yeah, that's going to do it for the spoiler territory. So as we hit this point in the video, all right, everybody, welcome back. So as we get to the conclusion of the game, I forgot to there was one point that I was talking about during the spoiler section of this podcast that I realized that I forgot to mention. So before I conclude the review here, I'm going to make one more point about something that I didn't appreciate in this game. Throughout this entirety of the game, this has gone on for the entire series in spurts, a lot of the time, if you fight something that is not human, you defeat it. You defeat it handily. You may, like, even if you destroy it easily, which I did in some occasions, they still act like you struggled and it was a tough battle. But you definitively beat it. There's no questioning it. The beast is gone. Almost any time in this game, especially where I really started to get annoyed by it, if you fight another human being, the goal of this game is to tell you that you're not ready. You're not powerful enough to defeat them yet. Anytime you face somebody, you didn't actually beat them, even though you either zero their HP, they drop to a knee. By the end of it, when the cutscene starts, they're still standing tall and you're on your knees. I don't like that. The game tries to tell you constantly, you're not good enough. You're not good enough. You're not good enough. That's annoying. Because if I'm playing and the battle says nothing, because these battles especially now have goals. Some, like the first two games was just straight up, you HP them. That's it. And now Trails of Cold Steel 3, sometimes it'll be like, just get this person's health down 30%. Then it makes sense. But there are times in this game where you will 0 HP an enemy. 0 HP them. And they act like nothing's happened. They act like they haven't been taken a scratch. That's bullshit. Because if you're going to do that, stop doing these battles where it ends when you 0 HP them. Have it so that they beat you right away. Like, let's say you get 3 turns. You just do it the best you can, and then they finally just wipe you out with one big attack. And that happens in some boss battles, but it's usually triggered by you getting their HP down. So it still comes into this game of, you can actually perceivably do this if you can beat them if they just don't do this one thing. So it's annoying that the game constantly tries to give you this, you're just not powerful enough. You'll get there, but you're not there yet. It's the whole thing of like, Goku can't beat somebody the first time he fights them, but after he just gets destroyed, he can beat them next time. It's constantly done though. There's never a point where you actually feel like you've triumphantly beaten any of these people. Nobody in Ouroboros I feel like Rean can actually take on. He just gets them enough to the point that they're like, okay, now I'm gonna put my serious face on. He's never beaten somebody with their serious face. So it's kind of irritating that 3 games in, Rean Schwarzer, even with the Divine fucking Knight, even with Valimar at his side, which I guess I should have explained that for those who aren't familiar. The Divine Knights are basically like, I guess you can call them Gundams. They're mechs. So you can use them in battle. Although in the second game, you could actually summon him during the battle. I can't remember. I think you can in this game as well. It just took a little bit longer to unlock again. But yeah, it's just basically like this Gundam that he can fight in as like part of this other thing. Because there are separate battles that are just Gundam on Gundam or Gundam on monsters. And they have their own little slight mechanics, but it doesn't really change much. It's just more of they take a stance and you have 3 options of where you can hit them, and one of them's like the critical hit, one of them's a block, sometimes even a counter, and one time just doesn't, it's just a normal attack. But yeah. It's irritating that, you can play as a character who seems to have grown a lot, and then the game proceeds to keep telling you that it doesn't. But taking all that aside, I said during the spoiler stuff that there's certain things that happen in this game that are a little bit weird, and yet I still can't help but look at this game as a game that's fantastic. And quite frankly, one of the best that I've ever played. Everything about this game, by the time it was over, as much as now in the review I've talked about things that I don't like, when I finished the game, I wasn't thinking about it. Whether it was the never being able to beat something, whether it was some of the mystical elements that happen in the game, some of the confusing stuff that happens. All of that stuff went by the wayside when the game was over because I was just in a state of holy shit, this was unbelievable. The battle system is infinitely improved. The break system adds a lot more of an intensity to it. The brave order system gives you a little bit more flexibility in what you can do. And I mean, some of the even like the magic spells that they do, the skills you can use, the orbs you can arm people with is like kind of like the same thing like what materia is in Final Fantasy VII. Some of the builds I came up with were really super cool. Like I had Kurt as like my full tank with a counter rate that is unreal. Like I think his counter rate by the time the game was done was 87%. So basically, if you attack Kurt, you had basically a 1 in 10 chance of hitting him, and if you didn't hit, he would hit you back. And I also had his counter attack damage up to about 300%. So not only would he would hit you 3 times harder. So that was crazy. And there goes the motorcycle, because we have somebody in the building next to us that feels like he has to let everybody know he's in a motorcycle. It's the downside of being in an apartment building. You have to deal with this stuff all the time. I hope that didn't come through terribly, but I feel like saying it because I like talking about things that make me upset around here. Otherwise, I had Muse as my big healer build, like basically just all into magic. Rean's build was straight up first damage, just destroy shit, and then also he would like a lot of these characters would also just inflict a lot of status effects. Yuna I had set up that if anybody had a status effect, the damage would up. So Yuna was kind of like this bridge to everything. Rean was the one that just hit hard and hit fast. Kurt was the one that hit hard if you tried to touch him, and he would always be in the front, so you would always touch him. Muse was the one in the back just casting spells that would either destroy pockets of the field or keep you alive to not even really have to worry about stuff. And then Yuna would be the one right in between everything that would take advantage of every little thing that you incurred on the map before that. So she was kind of like the follow-up, essentially. And it worked out great. I ended up using those four most of the game. Even when they start bringing in the old Class 7 from the first two games, I still stuck with the main core that I had. I probably could have built the party that I want with the characters that I like from the previous games as well. I just ended up figuring, well, I've already built these and I've already figured out what I want to do with them. So I still ended up, by the end of the game, having some pretty nice builds on all the characters that I ended up using, because they do, like what a lot of JRPGs do when you have massive amounts of characters, they have dungeons that have separate parties. So in one dungeon where you have 3 different parties running, I had 3 pretty good parties that were well balanced out. So it's not like I didn't use anybody else, I just used those 4. I definitely found uses for everybody. If there were anybody that I didn't really use very much, it was Millium. I didn't use a lot. Usus I didn't use very much. There was one other person. Who was it that I didn't use too much? It might have been Angelica, but I guess if the old Class 7, it was just Millium and Gaius, because everybody else I got somewhat of a use for. But otherwise, I mean, every character really had their uses. They all have their specific abilities that make them very good. And when you couple that with a battle system that, like I said, has been improved, character arcs that are very well fleshed out, almost every character, even the NPCs in this new game, have their own little bits that are really fun. Everything about this game is fun. Like the serious story stuff is really good. The side stuff is a great bridge. It kind of evens you back out. You're back into the comedy stuff. You're back into the lighter-hearted stuff that just kind of gets you, okay, serious stuff happened. Okay, I need a downer. I need things to come back down to like a normal level. That's what those bits do. All that stuff together gets mixed together into a game, kind of like what the Persona games were, where they have that great balance of really good storytelling when it needs to get serious, and then also really puts in the fun, puts in like the casual stuff, and mixes that together really well. So I'm going to do this right now. I put my 2 games at the top of Final Fantasy X and Persona 4. Those are my 2 favorite JRPGs of all time. Would I put Trails of Cold Steel 3 at the same level with them? At this point, yes. In the long term, will that happen? I think if I was to put it like a percentage chance, I think there's about a 90% chance that when, let's say we get to the later part of the next generation and I'm starting a whole new myriad of JRPGs, you never know. I may be looking at Trails of Cold Steel 3 as being that top echelon with those games. And hell, Trails of Cold Steel 4 may do the same thing. So I'm going to give a couple of different ways of reviewing this game. So straight up, is this a buy right away? Yes. At full price, I would suggest this game. If you are a JRPG person, absolutely. If you're not a JRPG person, then we get into this aspect. Is it a full price? No. Because there are things about this game that will probably get to you right away. And not to mention, I would tell you to go back and play the original too. And are those must-plays if you're a JRPG fan? Yes. Are they must-plays if you are not a JRPG fan? Probably not. And then if you literally have never played a JRPG before, would I suggest this? Going back to the first game, I would say yes, but be prepared for a long game and a game that's going to require you to grind a little bit. Now, you can play on an easier difficulty and you won't have to grind nearly as much. I played on easy. I didn't play on the beginner mode. I played on easy just because I usually like to play JRPGs on easy, not because I don't want a challenge, but because the game's already long enough as it is. I just want to be able to go through each area without having to spend like hours in an area doing stuff and grinding levels, and just enjoy the story, because the story is far more important than grinding up levels. If I want to grind up levels, I'll go play an MMO. That's kind of where I'm at now, because I have like a full-time job. I don't have time to spend over and over playing an excess amount of JRPG time. And considering I'm still working during the COVID stuff, I haven't had any extra time, so it would make sense to not want to have to overly grind. But like, as a first-time player, I think you can find a lot to love in this. And as a story, it does a fantastic job at that. So that's my rating. Is it a must-play for JRPGs? Yes. Is it a must-play for people that aren't too sure about that or just kind of light on JRPGs? I would say maybe. It's like a maybe. Check it out. Maybe if the price is a little bit better. I know that the first two games are, I think it's around $20 now if you check out a good deal on PS4. I'm not sure what it's like on Steam. I assume it's similar. But yeah, if you can find it under $30, and I'm talking Canadian or US, like, I'd take a pop at it. And I would even say go as far as try to play Trails in the Sky if you want to go that deep. I tried to. I think my problem is I can't go back and play a lot of old games to begin with. So with that format, especially already being in the middle of Trails of Cold Steel, I'm like, man, like, nah, I'll just read up on what happened and that'll be it. So that's that part. Now, if I was to give this a numerical rating, it's a 10. And that's right now at a 10. I do believe that this is a masterpiece of a game. And I would rate Trails of Cold Steel 1 at an 8, Trails of Cold Steel 2 at a 9. So it's progressively gotten better. And it makes me wonder if Trails of Cold Steel 4 can retain that 10. The difference is Trails of Cold Steel 4 is going to be rated upon how it is able to finish this story. Even if the game is really good, if I don't like the finish, it's not going to be a 10. There's just no way. But numerically right now, Trails of Cold Steel 3 is what I consider to be a masterpiece of a game. 10 is not perfect. 10 still means there are flaws, but 10 means I can look past any of the flaws and tell you that this game is one of my favorites of all time. The last but not least, I'm going to separate things. So I'm going to give a star rating for everything individually. So we'll start with story. I will say the story is at a 4. Now you would say, well, if it's a perfect game, why is it not a 5? The only reason I'm saying it's a 4 is because the story itself is amazing, but there are parts that are frustrating. Like I said, the mystical stuff gets a little bit weird and confusing and takes away from what I really like, which is the political stuff. If I was just doing the story rating based on the political struggle stuff that the series has been doing, it's a 5. And hell, I would cheat and give it a 6 star, because it's been that good. I don't care much for politics in games, but this game has done such an amazing job at making politics seem real and seeing what it could actually be if it's taken completely in an evil manner into an authoritarian dictatorship. That is really where I love that aspect. But because of the mysticism that gets a little bit too strange and a little bit too weird and takes away, and then because of, like I said earlier, the stuff of Rean being constantly told he's not good enough to take on anything, the little bit of frustrations there just knock it to a 4. But it's not to say that the story is not a 5 star, it's just there are parts that just kind of detract from it. The characters I will give a 5 star, because I thought at the beginning of this game that I was going to hate it, because they completely stripped away all the characters that I liked and threw in like a bunch of characters I've never seen before. And in the early stage, I thought it was going to be meh. And by the end of it, I was way off. I ate so many words after this game really got going, especially by the crossbow arc, like I said. As soon as things really started picking up, I started really attaching to everybody. They were all great characters. The gameplay, 5 stars. Battle system infinitely improved. The overworld, they keep slowly opening things up to you. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of side stuff, all the side quests, there's all the side activities. Like I said, the card game, fishing, cooking, all these things. And everything is pretty fair. Like the orbment system where you are able to build your characters the way that you want them to, you can do almost whatever you want. There are certain characters that you probably don't want to make certain types of builds for because they're more geared to something just based on their skills. But you could pretty much make anybody into a tank if you really wanted to. You could make anybody into a magician if you really wanted to. So the freedom really helps with that. And then also giving you so many different characters to choose from, it really does give you the sense of like, you can do this however you feel like it. And when everything else has been infinitely improved, there are a lot more items that you can work with. There are different ways to get certain items. There are all these little special missions you can go on that can add to your enjoyment of the game, make certain items a little bit cheaper. Like, for example, you can find seeds throughout the game that you can give to a character who will now grow fruits and vegetables. And those fruits and vegetables are similar to items that already exist, but they do a little bit more and they're a little bit cheaper. So by the end of the game, instead of buying like the best potion, you can instead go to her and buy a certain, I think it's watermelon is the best one, and it's cheaper and does just a little bit better than the potions do. So there's that little extra stuff. Same with if you go fishing, you can turn that into stuff. If you catch certain bugs that you get from defeating enemies, sometimes they carry off these things. He'll make you dishes that end up doing these crazy things. Recipes that you cook. There are 4 different versions. There's the base version. There is like a great version, which has better stuff. There is the perfect version, which is always the best thing that you can do. And there's also the you fucked up version, which is what I like to call it, where and only certain characters can do it. So each of these items, and even the ones that are you fucked up items, they have their own little perks. I didn't end up using too many of them because since playing on easy, I didn't have to worry about healing nearly as much and I could just do it with magic. I didn't use a lot of the items, but you look at the descriptions of what they give you. By the end of the game, there is so much variety of items you can carry that you can really plan out. Like if you're playing on the harder difficulties, you have the infinite freedom to plan ahead with all these different items that can get you out of a jam. So all of these things together really can encompass a great game. And even though there's a 4 and 2 5 stars, this game, like I said, is a 10 out of 10. It is a fantastic game. So final thoughts on this game. If you have never played a Legend of Heroes game, if you want to get the full satisfaction, you start from Trails in the Sky, and then if you can find any way to import from Zero or to Azure, and maybe somebody's fans translated. I haven't looked into that part because I'm not going to look, because now that I know some of the story, I really don't feel like looking too deep into it. But like I said earlier, if you just want to start at Trails of Cold Steel because they're available right now in full, because I don't think Trails in the Sky Part 3 is even available still. I think it's still yet to pop up on Steam. So if you actually just want to complete a series, starting from Trails of Cold Steel 1 is a great way to start. And if you are a JRPG person and you haven't tried these before, these are must-plays. I think these are the best JRPGs in the last decade, in the last 10 years, and that's including the Persona games. Because Persona 5 I'm a little bit iffy with, although I've heard that Royal is much better. I need to go and play that. I'm hoping to play that at some point down the road. But yeah, straight up, this is an incredible series. And 3 games out of 4, I'm now talking about this being maybe my favorite franchise, my favorite series of all time. Because I can't really count Final Fantasy because they're not really linear. They don't follow anything. Persona isn't really linear either, although there is a slight crossover between 3 and 4, but there isn't really much of one. In terms of JRPG series as a whole, like there isn't a lot that like go to this extent and have this many parts. But if we're talking just franchise altogether, the only thing that this can really compare to is Mass Effect, and this has the potential to beat Mass Effect. It really does. And yeah, what more can I say about that? So like I said, if you're a JRPG person and you haven't tried Trails of Cold Steel before, do it. Absolutely do it. If you feel like you want to go deep enough, go into the Trails in the Sky and work your way up. But if you want to just deal with one device that has as much as you can get, just start from Trails of Cold Steel. And as soon as you get confused, just look up that character on Google, like just get a sense of what they are. And maybe you'll get a little bit more sense of the story. Just be a little bit aware that you might end up getting spoiled on something by accident. So just tread carefully when you do that. But that's going to do it for this review. So we're almost an hour and a half in here. Yeah, this is how each of these reviews are going to go. I have 2 games at this point that are also on the docket that I got to go through. I got Uncharted 4 on the list, which will definitely not be an hour and a half. And I have Yakuza 6, The Song of Life, which I will go through. And I also kind of want to do a video on that as well, of just ranking all the Yakuza games now that I've caught up completely. But yeah, this is going to be my format for reviewing games from now on. The reason for that is, quite honestly, like, I don't have the capability. Well, I mean, I can definitely record each game, but I don't really want to have, like, I don't want to spend the money on a hard drive just to house all this footage. I don't have that capability right now, because I'm not the guy making thousands and thousands of dollars each year. It's just not happening. So living paycheck to paycheck, you don't really have the ability to keep spending all this money on stuff just for this channel. And especially when nobody's technically watching this stuff right now, the key incentive is not really there either. Who knows, if this channel is up to like 10,000 plus subscribers, maybe I start thinking about that stuff. But as of right now, to 211 subscribers and probably not that many views on this video at the time it gets posted, I mean, you know, I'm still trying to get the consistency out there. And this is a format that I can do that doesn't tax me too hard, and I can still get what I want to get out there. And not to mention that, you know, I just gush about a game for an hour and a half. Uncharted will probably be like half an hour, because it's not that much to talk about. Yakuza 6 might be maybe an hour. Like, it's going to be varying. Like, I can't guarantee that every show is going to be this long. Hell, there may even be games that take even longer than this. Who knows what will happen when Trails of Cold Steel 4 come out? Who knows what happens when Persona 5 Royal come out? You never know. But that's going to do it for this. So thank you so much for coming here at this edition of the Radical Review. So if you're watching this on YouTube, like the video if you enjoyed it. I mean, I assume you did, because if you stayed through an hour and a half, you probably had to have. Share this video with all your friends if you think this is something they like too. Comment below on what you thought of everything together, whether it's what I thought about the game, whether it's the format of this video, any suggestions, any ideas, any criticism, or even just gushing about the game itself. I'd welcome that in the comments. I try to comment on anything that gets posted there. But yeah, there's that. If you are listening to this on any audio device, if you have the ability to rate this show, that includes the VCR podcast as a whole. It's on this channel. Please do so. Check out the VCR podcast as well, as it's a show between me and my friends Chris and Vish, as we just talk about like what happened in the last 7 days of games, not to mention what we've been playing, because I've been talking about Trails of Cold Steel 3 on there several times then too. So there's all that. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much for checking out this radical review on what may be, by the time that this is all said and done, either one of my favorite games of all time or the favorite game of all time for me. So thank you again, guys, and we will see you on the next show. Take care.